You know, there's this moment that comes to all of us, sooner or later. That moment when you realize everything you believed, everything you thought was true, was built on lies. For some people, that moment comes early enough to change their path. For others, like me, it comes too late. I was 17 years old when I put on that uniform. 17. Just a boy, really. Oh, I didn't see it that way then. None of us did. We thought we were men, ready to serve something greater than ourselves. We had no idea at all, what we were really serving. But before I go any further, do me a favor. Grab yourself some coffee, maybe something to eat. Settle in, because what I'm about to tell you, it's not easy to hear, and it wasn't easy to live through. But you need to hear it. We all do. Because forgetting is how it happens again. So stay with me to the end, and if this story means something to you, hit that subscribe button. Not for me, but so others can hear it too. Now, let me take you back to a morning in November 1938. I was riding my bicycle to school, you see. It was one of those crisp autumn mornings, the kind where your breath makes little clouds in the air. I was wearing my Hitler Youth uniform, same as every other boy my age. We had to wear them on national holidays. It was just normal. That's what you have to understand. All of this, it felt normal. But as I pedaled through town that morning, something was different. First, I saw broken glass, just scattered across the pavement, catching the early light. Then I saw furniture demolished, thrown out onto the street, clothes strewn everywhere, showcases that had been smashed, their contents looted, and then traces of blood. I didn't understand at first. I kept riding, seeing more and more destruction. Every Jewish shop, every Jewish home I passed, the same scene. Windows shattered, doors kicked in, lives torn apart while the city slept. By the time I reached school, most of my classmates had seen the same things. We gathered in small groups, talking in hushed voices, not quite sure if we should be pleased or disturbed. See, we'd been taught that Jews were the enemy. We'd been taught that Germany needed to be strong, needed to be pure. But this felt different somehow. This felt personal, cruel. We were all waiting for Theo. That was our physics teacher, a man we respected more than anyone. He was older, you see. He'd lived through the First War. He'd seen things we hadn't. And we knew, somehow, that he would help us understand what had happened. When he finally entered the classroom, I'll never forget his face. He was pale. His hands were shaking. And when we stood to salute him, as we always did, he just stood there. For the longest time, he just stood there, covering his face with his hands. Then he looked at us, and he said, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "Boys, the things that happened last night in our country will be to the shame of our nation for 1,000 years to come." We were stunned. Most of us thought the Jews had it coming. After all, that's what we were taught. One of them had killed a German diplomat in Paris, and, well, actions have consequences, right? That's what we told ourselves. But Theo saw something we didn't see. He saw the future. He saw where all of this was heading, and he tried to warn us. I wish I'd listened. You know what's strange? Out of the 20 boys in that classroom, only 3 of us would survive the war. 3. And the best of us, the kindest, the most decent, they fell first. There was Heinz. Good Catholic boy, strong sense of right and wrong. He stood up for what he believed in, even when it cost him, even when teachers slapped him across the face for defending Jews. He volunteered to be a paratrooper in 1943, killed in action a year later, fighting against the Allied invasion. Then there was Paul. Brilliant mind, that one. Loved poetry, loved philosophy. He wanted to be an exemplary soldier, serve with honor. He made it through most of the war, only to die in a Soviet prisoner camp in Siberia. Never came home. And Karl, poor Karl, he survived the war, but what came back from Russia wasn't really Karl anymore. The prisoner camp destroyed him from the inside. Years later, after trying so hard to rebuild his life, he hanged himself. 3 out of 20. That's what's left of that classroom full of boys in their Hitler Youth uniforms, eager to serve, eager to prove themselves. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back further, because you need to understand how it starts, how normal people, good people, convince themselves that evil is actually virtue. I grew up in a Germany that was broken. My father, he'd fought in the First War, been wounded badly. Came home to a country that was falling apart. Inflation so bad that people needed wheelbarrows full of money just to buy bread. Unemployment everywhere. Desperation. Hunger. Shame. My father joined the Nazi Party in 1930. Not because he was evil, but because he was desperate. Because Hitler promised to make Germany strong again, to give us back our pride, to fix what the Treaty of Versailles had broken. And you know what? Things did get better. My father got work again. The economy improved. We had food on the table. So when Hitler said the Jews were to blame for our problems, well, it was easy to believe, because things were getting better now that he was in charge, weren't they? That's how it works, you see. They don't start by asking you to do terrible things. They start by giving you something to believe in, something to be proud of. They give you enemies to blame for your problems. They make it all seem so simple. I joined the Jungvolk when I was 10 years old. That was the junior branch of the Hitler Youth, and I loved it. The camping trips, the songs, the sense of belonging to something bigger than myself. We learned about German history, German culture. We learned to be strong, to be disciplined, to serve the fatherland. We also learned to hate, but they didn't call it hate. They called it protecting the nation, recognizing the enemy, being vigilant. My father, he kept a copy of Der Stürmer in his office. That was the Nazi newspaper, full of vicious cartoons depicting Jews as evil, subhuman creatures. I read it every week, and slowly, without even realizing it, I started to see Jews not as people, but as a threat, an abstract conspiracy that had to be stopped. I never met a Jewish person I hated. That's the thing. It wasn't personal. It was all theoretical. The Jewish conspiracy, the Jewish plot to control the world, the Jewish threat to Germany's survival. Until that morning in November 1938, I'd never seen what that abstract hatred looked like when it became concrete action. Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. That's what they called it, as if it was something poetic, something almost beautiful. But there was nothing beautiful about it. Over 1,000 synagogues burned, thousands of Jewish businesses destroyed, 30,000 Jewish men arrested and sent to concentration camps, and 91 people murdered in the streets. 91 people, human beings with families, with lives, with dreams, murdered because of what they were, not what they'd done. When I got home that day, my mother was upset. She wouldn't say why at first, but eventually she told us. Through tears, she told us about an old Jewish man who'd been chased by stormtroopers into one of those tall buildings with many floors. He ran up the stairs, higher and higher, trying to escape. They followed him all the way to the top, and when he reached the highest window, they threw him out, threw him to his death while he begged for mercy. My mother couldn't stop thinking about it. Neither could I. Every night, she said, she saw that old man climbing those stairs, knowing what waited for him at the top. That was the first time I felt pity for a victim of the hatred my father and I had entertained for years. But I still didn't question the system, really. I told myself this was war. Things happen in war that we can't always justify, but that doesn't mean the war itself is wrong. I was very good at making excuses. In school, we were assigned an essay. The topic was, "Do we do injustice to the Jews?" Most of us wrote what was expected. We justified the violence. We blamed the victims. We convinced ourselves that protecting Germany required harsh measures. All except Hans. He had the courage to write the truth. "Yes," he wrote, "we do injustice to the Jews, and that is a shame to our nation." They suspended him for that, nearly expelled him. Only Theo's intervention saved him. But even after he came back, 3 different teachers slapped him in the face, not for doing anything wrong, just for telling the truth. We all saw it happen. We all knew it was wrong. But we did nothing. Because that's what you do in a system like that. You keep your head down, you don't make waves. You survive. My father, he was complicated. He genuinely believed in Hitler, believed that Germany was finally getting the respect it deserved. But he wasn't cruel by nature. When my mother told that story about the old Jewish man, I saw guilt on my father's face. Real guilt. But he pushed it down, just like I did, just like millions of Germans did. Because admitting you were wrong, admitting you'd supported something evil, that's harder than you can imagine. There was a man who lived near us, Jewish man named Sally. He had a wife and a daughter. They kept to themselves, bothered no one. My father had done business with him before the Nazis came to power. I remember one day, must have been the summer of 1940, we were at a garden restaurant, celebrating. France had surrendered, you see. We thought the war was over. Everyone was happy, relieved. My mother was crying tears of joy because my older brother was coming home. Then my father noticed Sally and his family at another table, just enjoying the day like everyone else, drinking coffee, eating cake. My father called over the waiter, pointed at Sally's table, said he wouldn't tolerate the presence of Jews in that garden. I watched as the waiter delivered the message. I watched Sally's face go pale. I watched his wife grab her daughter's hand. I watched them hurry out, heads down, trying not to be noticed. The daughter, she couldn't have been more than 16. And the look on her face, I can still see it. Bewildered, frightened, ashamed of something she had no reason to be ashamed of. That moment ruined the whole day. My mother whispered, "Poor people, what have they done?" And even my father fell silent, some part of him realizing he'd done something cruel. But we didn't talk about it. We never talked about it. We just went home and life went on. I didn't know, couldn't have known, that a few years later, that girl and her parents would be dead, murdered in the camps that I pretended didn't exist. By the time I was 18, I was in the Wehrmacht, the German army. I'd volunteered, of course. We all did. It was expected. It was honorable, or so we told ourselves. Basic training was brutal. They broke you down, built you back up in the image they wanted, obedient, disciplined, unquestioning. We learned to follow orders without thinking, to see the enemy as less than human, to believe that our cause was just. The military, though, it was strangely apolitical. We didn't talk about Jews. We didn't talk about the party's ideology. We just focused on the enemy in front of us. First the Poles, then the French and British. Real enemies with real weapons, not abstract conspiracies. I thought that was normal. I thought the military was supposed to be that way. I didn't realize that the apolitical nature of the Wehrmacht was deliberate. Hitler didn't trust the old officer corps, the men who'd served in the Kaiser's army. They had their own code, their own traditions. They weren't fanatics like the SS. But they still served. That's the thing to remember. They still served. I was stationed at various bases, doing guard duty mostly, training for what we all knew was coming, war with Russia. It was only a matter of time. And then something happened that shook me more than anything since Kristallnacht. My friend Paul, the one who loved poetry and philosophy, he came to visit me during a leave. He was studying physics at university, and he told me about a theory by a Jewish scientist named Albert Einstein. The theory of relativity. Now, I didn't understand it, not really, but Paul explained that Einstein had discovered that space and time, they weren't fixed. They changed depending on motion. An object moving at high speed would actually become shorter. A clock moving at high speed would run slower. It sounded like madness, like clever tricks with words designed to confuse people. My father had said as much years earlier, dismissing Einstein as a Jewish charlatan trying to muddy the waters of good German science. But Paul's professor believed it, taught it to his students, even though it was officially forbidden because Einstein was Jewish. And Paul believed it too. We argued about it all day. I kept saying it had to be nonsense. How could motion affect the very nature of space and time? It didn't make sense. But Paul was patient. He kept explaining, kept showing me why it had to be true. And slowly I began to realize something terrifying. Either this Jewish scientist is one of the greatest minds in human history, or everything we'd been taught about Jews was a lie. It couldn't be both. Either Jews were inferior, incapable of real genius, or we'd been wrong about everything. I didn't know what to think. My mind was spinning. I wanted to believe in my Führer, in my country, in the cause we were fighting for. But here was proof, undeniable proof, that a Jew could create something brilliant, something that would change how we understood the universe itself. When Paul left that day, when his train pulled away from the station, the last thing he said to me was, "Science is science." And I whispered back, though he couldn't hear me, "And truth is truth." But I still didn't act on that truth. I still put on my uniform the next day, still followed orders, still served. Because that's what you do when you're trapped in a system like that. You see the truth, but you can't face it, not fully. Because facing it would mean admitting that everything you've done, everything you believed, was wrong. The war with Russia began in June 1941. Operation Barbarossa, they called it, the greatest military invasion in history. Over 3 million German soldiers pouring across the border, confident we'd crush the Soviet Union in a matter of weeks. I was sent to the far north, Finland, right up near the Arctic Circle. My job was to help hold the line against the Russian forces there. It was cold, colder than anything I'd experienced, and it was brutal. But you know what? Even up there, even in that frozen hell, I still believed, still thought we were fighting for something righteous, still thought Hitler knew what he was doing. The doubt was there, sure, growing stronger every day, but I pushed it down, because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. I served with a man named Helmut, good soldier, loyal, hard-working. He was ethnically German, but had grown up in Poland. His father owned a farm there, employed Polish workers. One of those workers, Helmut told me once, had killed his father after Germany invaded Poland, just murdered him, because of what Germany was doing to Poland, because of what we were doing. I remember thinking even then, maybe we weren't the victims, maybe we were the cause of all this suffering. But I still didn't act on that thought. The years dragged on. 1941, 42, 43. The war that was supposed to be over in weeks turned into years. The victories stopped coming. The defeats started piling up. Stalingrad, Kursk. We were losing, and we knew it. But we kept fighting, because what else could we do? I became a corporal, then a sergeant. I led men into battle, followed orders, did my duty. And all the while, the doubt kept growing. I started hearing rumors, whispers about camps in the East, not prisoner of war camps, but something else, places where Jews were being sent, places they never came from. I told myself they were just rumors, propaganda from the enemy, because the alternative was too monstrous to believe. But deep down, I knew. We all knew. We just didn't want to admit it. By 1944, the war was clearly lost. The Americans and British were pushing in from the west, the Russians from the east. Germany was being crushed between them. And then came the attempted assassination of Hitler. Some of our own officers tried to kill him, tried to end the war before Germany was completely destroyed. They failed, and Hitler's revenge was terrible. Thousands of officers executed, thousands more sent to camps, and for those of us who remained, political officers were assigned to our units, to watch us, to make sure we stayed loyal, to give us the ideological indoctrination that had been missing from the Wehrmacht. That's when I finally saw it clearly. Hitler didn't care about Germany. He didn't care about the German people. He only cared about his own power, his own twisted vision. And by the time I understood that, it was too late to do anything but survive. The war ended in May 1945. Germany surrendered. The Third Reich, which Hitler had promised would last 1,000 years, lasted 12. I was 23 years old. I'd spent 6 years in uniform, 6 years serving a cause that I'd believed was righteous. 6 years of my life wasted, worse than wasted. And then we started to learn the truth, the full truth. The camps, the gas chambers, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, the Romani people, the disabled, the political prisoners, the Soviet POWs, millions upon millions of human beings exterminated like vermin. I remember seeing the photographs, the films, mountains of corpses, living skeletons barely able to stand, children with numbers tattooed on their arms. And I remember thinking of Sally and his family, the girl with the bewildered look on her face, the old man climbing the stairs, begging for mercy. They were all dead, all of them, murdered while I served, murdered while I looked away. I wanted to die, I truly did. The guilt was unbearable. How could I have been so blind? How could I have believed such obvious lies? But I survived. 3 of us survived out of that classroom of 20, and we had to live with what we'd done, what we'd been part of. Theo was gone. He disappeared that very night he said goodbye to us, December 31st, 1939. No one knew what happened to him. Maybe the Gestapo took him. Maybe he fled. I'd like to think he escaped, that somewhere he survived and lived to see Hitler's defeat. But I never found out. Paul died in that Russian camp, his brilliant mind wasted. Karl came back broken and eventually took his own life. Heinz, the boy with the courage to speak truth to power, died fighting for a lie. The best of us fell first. That's what happens in wars like that. The good, the decent, the brave, they're the first to go. What's left are people like me, survivors who have to live with what they did, what they failed to do. It took me decades to really understand what happened, to understand how I could have been part of something so evil while believing I was doing good. See, they don't recruit monsters. They recruit normal people, people who want to belong, people who want to matter, people who want to believe in something. And then, slowly, bit by bit, they change you. They give you enemies to hate. They give you reasons that sound logical. They surround you with others who believe the same things, so you never have to question whether it's true. And before you know it, you're capable of things you never thought possible. Not because you're evil, but because you've been convinced that evil is good. That's what I want you to understand. That's why I'm telling you this story, even though it brings me shame to admit what I was. Because it can happen again. It is happening again, in different forms, in different places. People are still being taught to hate, still being given simple answers to complicated questions, still being told that some lives matter less than others. And too many people are making the same mistakes I made, believing the lies, following the crowd, telling themselves that this time it's different, this time we're right. But evil never announces itself as evil. It always comes wrapped in the flag. It always promises to make things better. It always gives you someone to blame. Theo knew that. He tried to warn us. Those words he spoke the morning after Kristallnacht. The things that happened last night will be to the shame of our nation for 1,000 years to come. He was right. He saw what we couldn't see or wouldn't see. And you know what haunts me most? The fact that I loved that man, respected him more than anyone. And when he told me the truth, I rejected it because it didn't fit with what I wanted to believe. How many of us do that today? How many of us reject truth because it's uncomfortable, because it challenges our beliefs, because accepting it would mean admitting we were wrong? I spent my whole life trying to make sense of what happened, trying to understand how millions of Germans, good people, decent people, could participate or allow such evil. And the answer is, we told ourselves stories. We convinced ourselves that we were the victims, that we were just defending ourselves, that the Jews, the communists, whoever, they were the real threat. We believed those stories because we wanted to believe them, because the alternative meant facing hard truths about ourselves and our nation. I think about that classroom now. 20 boys full of hope and pride and conviction. We thought we knew everything, thought we were serving something noble. Heinz knew better. He had the moral courage to stand up, even when it cost him, even when teachers beat him for it. And where did it get him? Dead on a battlefield in France, fighting for the very system he'd opposed. Paul, he understood that truth matters, that science is science regardless of who discovers it, that we can't let ideology blind us to reality. And he died in Siberia, his poetry silenced forever. Karl, he survived the war, but couldn't survive the peace. The things he saw, the things he did, they destroyed him from the inside out. And me? I survived. But sometimes I wonder if that's actually a blessing or a curse. You know what else haunts me? Years later, decades later, I learned that Helmut, my friend from the front, the one who served loyally through the entire war, he became a neo-Nazi. Can you believe that? After everything we went through, after everything we saw, after learning the truth about what we'd been part of, he still believes in it. I don't understand it. I'll never understand it. But it shows you how powerful those ideas are, how they can take root in someone's mind and never let go. I'm an old man now. Most of my life is behind me, and I've spent so much of it trying to atone for what I did, what I was.